The views and opinions on the following program are those of the participants and not necessarily those of KKVV Las Vegas.
The program you are about to hear has been pre-recorded for airing at this time. Please hold all phone calls. Once again, this is a pre-recorded program.
I believe we have a crisis of depth in our knowledge of the Bible. We think we know what the Bible says, but do we? Do we really? We may know the story, but we miss the message, the point, or the focus of that narrative. Hi, this is Pastor Steve Wonderink, and I invite you now to join me in digging in the Bible. Let's dig in the Bible together.
Hello again, and welcome to Dig in the Bible. I'm Pastor Steve, and it's good to be with you again. Again, please visit the diginthebible.com website. You'll find a lot of helpful things there, but most of all, you'll find an outline or a study guide for what I'm talking about today. I'm going through the In the Beginning book, the Bible study that I wrote. We're in the beginning, part 2, discussing Abraham, and specifically we're working on the Lot narratives. And so we are on part 2, lesson 6 of the Lot narratives. And if you go to the website, you'll be able to download a PDF so you can follow along in the study as we'll dig into the Bible together today. It's always good to have some kind of paperwork in front of you. I always include a lot of pictures and graphs and things like that to catch your eye and to explain things just a little bit better. Sometimes we learn from graphs and pictures just as well as we learn from words and hearings. So I encourage you to download that PDF. It currently still is free, but if you'd like to buy the whole series, that is on Amazon.com. Just look up my last name, Wonderink, and in the beginning, or just put Pastor Steve Genesis, and you'll see it show up on Amazon.com, and you can order the books there. Also, you can come and catch me at our church, Grace Valley Christian Reformed Church, located in 1370 East Robindale Road. 10:30 Sunday services. At 9:15, though, we are also going through the book of Exodus. And we are just starting part 2 of the book of Exodus, which is the wilderness. Part 1 was Exodus 1 through 15, where Israel finally leaves Exodus. And now we're moving into the wilderness after they cross the Reed Sea. We are moving on into the wilderness, and that whole journey, the narrative of their journey from the Reed Sea down to Mount Sinai, and then wandering for the 40 years, and finally ending up at the border of the Promised Land. That'll be part 2 of the Exodus narrative that goes all the way through Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. We'll be catching the narratives inside of there. And then we'll be coming back to catch the laws and the building of the tabernacle. That's our Sunday school. But I also will be covering that in this show probably next year sometime as we move through Genesis and move on into Exodus then as well. So again, all of that is on the website. You can see the radio show, download older radio shows, and get the PDFs for this week's. Also, I have my column that you'll be able to follow called Kairos Thoughts. It's a weekly column that I read here on this radio show, but you'll catch all the previous ones there on the website as well. Which reminds me, you can email me questions. And I have a number of questions, again, that I need to go over. We talked about the first 2 Lot narratives last week, our last time together, and one of them was about Melchizedek. The other question was about the land, the choice of land that Lot made. And I described the land in this narrative as a foil. And I need to explain it a little better. I had a lot of emailed questions. What exactly is a foil? Foil spelled F-O-I-L. Now that's like tin foil or aluminum foil. It's like a foil you can use with a sword, but this is different. This is more of a literary term or a drama term. Shakespeare has a lot of foils in his writing. And so the Bible also uses land as a foil. Now let me explain that, because that's going to be, I'm going to apply that again to today's narrative as we talk about the 3 more Lot narratives in the Abraham story and why they're there. A foil is something that determines your personality. It brings out what kind of a person you are. And the example I always use is picture this. You're walking down the street by yourself, nobody around, and you find a wallet with $1,000 cash in the wallet. What do? That wallet, or actually more likely the cash, is a foil. It brings out something in your personality. It tells whoever's watching, it tells you even, what your personality is like. If you pick up the wallet and bring it to the local police station, turn it in, or if you try to find the person whose license you just found that has an address on it, call that person and bring it to them, wallet intact with the $1,000 cash still there, what does that say about you? If you pull out the $1,000 and throw the wallet into the trash can, what does that say about you? The cash, the wallet, is a foil. Now that applies here in Genesis as we talk about Lot, because the land is a foil. The land, the promised land, the land that God promised Abraham he and his descendants would have, would occupy. But it just doesn't look like it right now. So when Lot looks at the land surrounding Sodom and Gomorrah, he chooses that. Abraham chooses God's promises. Even though it doesn't look like it, he's still a wandering nomad, a wandering shepherd. He really doesn't have any land to call his own. Lot looks down at Sodom and Gomorrah and finds something desirable, really good land, a good place to be, a place close to the cities, a place where he can sell his sheep, his herds, and do all this commerce. He decides to go to Sodom. Now, one of the things that I always ask you to do in these shows is to picture yourselves as the original intended audience. Sure, we can get a story out of this for application for us, but picture yourself as one of the children of Israel in the desert in the 40 years wandering, and you hear this story about the foil, about the land that's going to tell who you are, this land. The children of Israel are heading towards the promised land, and many want to turn back because of the fruit, because of how rich and lush Egypt is or was for them. They want to turn back to Egypt. Others are looking forward to the promise of the land, the promised land. So some in Israel, when they're hearing it, are understanding that they are like Lot. They want to go back to Egypt. They want to pick the land that looks great. But others want to stay with Abraham in the promised land. They want to go to the promised land, even though they don't see it yet. They're still wandering in the desert. They don't see it, but they know that they can rely on the promises of God. That's what Abraham did. That's what Moses, through this story, this narrative, was asking the children of Israel to do. The land is a foil. It determined the personality of the people. And for us, that application is, of course, do we rely on God's promises, which is something that we might not be able to see, but God has promised them to us, or do we rely on the quick and easy, wealthy fix? How do we rely on it? The land is a foil for us too. All right, let's move on to Lot Narratives, Part 2, Lesson 6. That was an answer to a lot of questions I had about what a foil is, and with land being the foil. So I needed to cover that because we're going to go back to Lot. Now that I'm skipping the part where Abraham pleads with, well, I'm going to talk about it this time, where Abraham pleads with the 3 visitors, and that's where we're going to pick it up today. Abraham knows that Lot is in trouble there in Sodom. And this is called the three visitors. It's Genesis 18. If you have your Bibles, go to Genesis 18, verses 16 to 33. And I'm not going to read it all for you. I'm not going to take the time. You can read it later. What I'm going to do is refer to a number of the verses within that section. There are three angelic representations of Yahweh that visit Abraham. Now, I purposefully said it that way. Most believe it was two angels and God himself, or two angels and maybe personified Jesus Christ, or pre-incarnate Jesus Christ that stopped by Abraham. I believe that it was three personalities of God. Okay, these three angelic representations of Yahweh as they visit Abraham. While they are leaving, we become privy to Yahweh's internal dialogue, okay, about telling Abraham what he is going to do. So to Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham asks if he will sweep away the righteous with the wicked, and then ask Yahweh to refrain from punishing if there are 50, 45, 40, 30, 20, and finally 10 righteous to be found. But I think the key part of it is, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute, is that the Lord, Yahweh, has an internal discussion with himself where he says, should I tell Abraham about what I'm about to do? All right, so we're going to skip the part of this narrative where these three angelic beings talk to Abraham about his promised son, which will be born next year. We're going to skip that part. That's why we're picking it up at verse 16. There are a few verses. These few verses are another example of what a literary masterpiece the Bible is, emphasizing its point and purpose through the use of perspective, poetic phrases, and verb tenses, as well as the actual words spoken. All right, this is an amazing piece of poetic literature. Genesis 18, verse 16 to 33. Verse 2 says 3 men. And then it says, Yahweh said to himself. Interesting. Yahweh said to himself. Who were these 3 men? In verse 1, it talks about the 3 men standing there ready to talk to Abraham. Most believe it was Yahweh himself incarnate along with 2 angelic beings, especially when it relates to the 2 angels interacting with Lot in chapter 18, which we're going to talk about next. But other sources consider this similar language to Elohim, or God's plural, and that God represented himself incarnate as 3 men, or 3 aspects of his personality. Yahweh, or the Lord Creator God, Yahweh the God of justice, and Yahweh the God of judgment. All 3 personalities show up in the dialogue. Verse 20 says, the God of justice says, the outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great. That is our God of justice. Now, I'm not talking about 3 different gods here. I'm talking about 3 different aspects of Yahweh, our Lord and Creator God. And then there's the aspect of God as judge, the God of judgment, and their sin, how grievous it weighs, verse 20. And then Yahweh, the Creator God, says, I will go down and see. Now this is echoes of the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11, where he goes down to see the tower that they are building. All right, this is the Creator God. This is the Re-Creator God that goes down to see. So it's interesting that these, I'm okay with them being angels representing God. I'm okay with that. But it's just fascinating to think of God himself in 3 persons standing there with Abraham, especially with our New Testament concept of the Trinity. And I'm not saying these 3 aspects of God represent the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. It's just interesting that he would represent himself in 3. Verse 22, Abraham remains standing before the Lord. In the oldest and best manuscripts, the phrase of this phrase is that the Lord stood before Abraham. But that runs against the grain of the subsequent translations. But since Abraham is the host, he is given first billing even in the presence of the Lord. But throughout the dialogue, in the verb tenses, and in the polite phraseology, you find Abraham, the host, and the most important person in the room. Do you understand what that means? Abraham as the host, and Yahweh, God, or these angels, then are in a subservient role in this household. Abraham tells Yahweh in verse 23, he says, "Far be it from you. You are the judge of all the earth, and so must do it right." Yahweh's response is a very flat, "If blank, then I will spare them." If, how many people? 40 people, then I will spare them. If it's 30 people, if it's 10 people, I will spare them. It's a very flat response. There's no emotion in the response, either in the verb tenses or in the words themselves. And then Abraham says, "Now that I have been so bold, though I am dust and ash." Now again, this is a polite rendering, but it insinuates Abraham as the prominent role in the conversation. He's the one that's in control in this conversation. We often think it's him on his knees begging the Lord, but he is the one in the authoritative control here. And again, Yahweh says, it gives a flat, "If so many people, then I will not destroy them." Okay? Finally, at the end of this narrative, verse 30, Abraham says, may the Lord, may Yahweh not be angry, but may I be so bold, but let me speak just once more. All of these insinuating the politeness of a host who is in control. You have to understand this ancient Near East mindset. We see a lot of it in those who are born and raised in an Eastern country. It's a very polite language that they will say things very politely, but the insinuation is that they're the ones in control. And that's what this Hebrew language is telling us here. Abraham is the one in control. Just fascinating, this play on language and use of these interesting or fascinating verb tenses, where Abraham shows that even though he's saying it very politely, in a surface reading, we would say that, well, Abraham is like groveling to the Lord, but no. This language doesn't show groveling. This language shows that he is in control of the conversation. And then verse 33, when Yahweh finished speaking with Abraham, he left, and Abraham returned home. That's the NIV translation. But Fox and Alter, if you have the Fox translation, which is called the Schocken Bible, and I appreciate his version, and it's kind of like Eugene Peterson's The Message. It's one guy's translation. And I appreciate Fox because he attacks it from a Jewish perspective, trying to retain the poetry of the original Hebrew. And so it's disjointed. Sometimes it's hard to read because Hebrew is that way. It just doesn't fit in our normal language style like something like the NIV or the NASB does. The Fox translation comes across a little disjointed, but it stays true to the original Hebrew and the original poetry of the Hebrew. Both Fox and Alter is another translation that did the Torah, the first 5 books. They both say that Abraham returned to his place, insinuating that it's not location but position in the order of things. Okay, let me read the NIV, verse 33 again. When Yahweh finished speaking with Abraham, he left, and Abraham returned home. Now the NIV and NASB translate that as home, but Fox and Alter, which is both Jewish translations, translate that as returned to his place, meaning that the roles were again switched, that God the Father, Yahweh, was in control, and Abraham was again the servant. Okay, Yahweh was back to having top billing, with Abraham being his servant. So this whole discourse, this whole discussion here, showed that Abraham was in control. This begs the question of who was questioning or testing whom here. Abraham shows that he has compassion on those who are crying out against the grievous sins of Sodom and Gomorrah. He shows even for a few righteous, he would save all of those oppressors. Abraham presses Yahweh to be this compassionate as well. God easily relents to the compassion of Abraham. Yahweh tested Abraham's compassion like he tested his faith earlier. The direction of the narration reversed, and the role of the righteous or compassionate God is played by Abraham. That's what the children of Israel would hear, that the gracious, righteous, compassionate God was played by Abraham, directing judgment on persecutors. There are distinct echoes of what the children of Israel just went through when God tried to save the Egyptians. If but a few would be righteous, but none were found, so the children of Israel were miraculously saved, like Lot, and the judgment of God was exercised on the Egyptians. Angels, fire and brimstone, etc. We can assume many of the Hebrew felt that Yahweh was unjust in the plagues of the Egyptians. Their friends, and maybe even some of them, were family members. This dispels that thought. What the children of Israel heard here in this narrative, this whole give and take between God and Abraham, was that God tried every which way he could to save the Egyptians, to not have to destroy the Egyptians. But he could find none righteous, especially Pharaoh. Pharaoh's heart was hardened over and over again, to the point where the sin of the Egyptians were ripe for God's punishment. Just like Sodom and Gomorrah, their sins were crying out. Their grievous sins were crying out. And that was an explanation to the children of Israel of what just happened in Egypt to the Egyptians. You have to believe many of these people in Egypt were friends and family of the Israelites who were there for hundreds of years and were there integrated into the society. It says in Exodus 1 that Pharaoh was worried because they were everywhere and they were growing everywhere. They did not, as much as people try to tell you, they did not just stay in Goshen. They were throughout all of Egypt. And in fact, there is archaeological evidence that they were throughout all of Egypt. And I'll talk about that once we get to the Exodus narrative. Or if you want to go to Egypt with me later this year, which you can find on our website, I'll talk about it there as well. We'll see the evidence of Israel throughout Egypt. All right, let's move on to the next Lot narrative. This is the destruction. Okay, now two angels. Now we're down to two angels, or two aspects of God the Father. Now it'll be interesting to see which aspect is gone and which two are still remain. So the two angels, this is Genesis 19, 1 through 21. The two angels arrive at Sodom with the purpose of seeing, again I put that in quotes, seeing if it was as bad as the cries they heard in heaven. Lot insists that they spend the night with him instead of in the public square where they would be in danger. And it turns out they were in danger anyway. And even Lot endangers himself by housing them. The angels tell Lot to take his people and leave. They negotiate where he is to flee to, and at sunrise, God destroys the cities. That's the story that you'll find, or the narrative that you'll find in 19 verse 1 through 21. Again, I won't read the whole narrative. What I'll do is I'll refer to a number of the verses as we go through. These two angels, or messengers, are either angelic beings or, as I talked about earlier, aspects of God from the last story. It would be the God of justice and the God of judgment who visited Sodom and Gomorrah. There is no creator or recreator God. In other words, there is no hope for Sodom and Gomorrah. There is no hope for recreation. We see throughout the Bible, especially in Genesis, the recreation that God does. He creates in Genesis 1. He creates again, another story in Genesis 2. He creates through Abel, and then he recreates through Seth. He recreates again through the flood. He recreates again through the Tower of Babel. And now he is recreating again through Abraham. But there is no recreation going to be happening through Sodom and Gomorrah. Now the children of Israel would again hear this because so much of the Exodus narrative is of them being born again, recreated. There's a lot of birthing stories. In fact, the narrative of them passing through the Red Sea or the Reed Sea is birth language. They are born anew as they go through the sea. And so they arrive in the desert, in the wilderness, as new people, separated from Egypt now. They are born again, recreated. So they would hear this recreation, and that Sodom and Gomorrah did not have this recreation that they did. All right, verse 3, Lot insisted strongly, it says. This is more than just Lot fearing for the danger of the strangers. This is an Arabic custom, where if someone is under your roof, in quotes, you must protect them, to the detriment of your own family. Exampled in Lot offering his daughters. But this command, in quotes, to care for the strangers does not come until Moses' time, and even Joshua in settling. So you hear this, even though the command is not done until later. Now, my wife and I had the opportunity to travel a lot in Egypt. And one of the trips that was just my wife and I that we went, and our guide took us to his father's farm along the Nile. And it's close to an area that I really wanted to see called Beni Hassan. And so my wife and I went there, and we went to his father's village and a farm that was nearby and just outside of a city called Minya. And we went to his farm, and it was a village that had, I would guess, about 1,000, maybe 1,200 people in this whole village. And my wife and I believe, were the first non-Egyptian white people that they saw in that village. I'm sure they saw some on TV or things like that they probably saw in their village center. They literally killed the fatted calf for us right in front of us. They butchered a calf there. We met with the village elders. We sat down with them, and I never felt safer in my life. And this was during the whole Muslim Brotherhood Morsi presidency. I never felt safer because you could sense, once you're under my roof, you are protected. You are protected. And so we met with the village elders. We met with my friend out there, met with his father. He took us out to his farm. I grew up on a farm in Indiana, so it was fascinating for me to spend time on this farm. And so we ate with them. We actually had to have 3 different meals with them because everybody wanted to host us. And we just had a great time there in this village, in the backwoods, if you want to say it that way, of Egypt. And it was just fascinating that you could literally feel that sense of, once you are under my roof, I will do everything in my power to protect you. You are that important to me as a visitor under my roof. And so Lot has that same sense here. And of course, that's the sense that God wanted to pass on to the Israelites as well. That sense of, if you're under my roof, I will take care of you. All right, verse 5, let us have sex with them. Again, literally, to know them. This has echoes of the knowing, in quotes, that goes on with the sons of God and the daughters of men. Okay, this is that verb, a forceful taking or dominating sex. The insinuation is that it is as bad as it was before the flood. That this Sodom and Gomorrah was just as bad as it was before the flood. And remember, that was the daughters of men and the sons of God and daughters of men that caused the flood in the first place. That's what was leading up to the flood at that point. So here you have the same insinuation that Sodom and Gomorrah were just as bad as the earth was before God destroyed it all and recreated it all. Which again, notice the recreation or the creator God is not here. God's aspect of recreation is not here. Verse 11, they were struck with blindness. Here the NIV takes too much for granted here. Literally, the translation is that they were struck with dazzling light and could no longer see. Another picture of the glory of God that God uses to guide his people and blind those who come against him. The pillar of light in the cloud leading Israel. They see that light every day. Both young and old, it says in verse 11, and that's a merism. Okay, that's a poetic use of words to signify everything. Both young and old. That doesn't mean just the old ones and just the young ones. It means all of them. It's a merism that stands for all of them. We hear merisms all the time. Bible is full of them. When Jesus says, I'm the first and the last, he doesn't mean he's just the A and the B, or the A and the Z, or the Alpha and the Omega. He means he's everything. That includes everything. I'm reading in one of my Bible studies through Romans, and Romans 1 talks about from faith to faith, that we are faith to faith from first to last. Okay, now that also is a merism. That means faith is everything, from first to last. All right, so you need to understand these poetic nuances as you read Scripture, and it'll get you much deeper and much richer as we go through it. So young and old is a merism, meaning all of them. Everyone in the city was after these angels, or after these strangers that they knew that came into town. Verse 15, with the coming of dawn. This is a common phrase for the beginning of a great work of God. The coming of dawn. You find that a lot in Psalms. You find that a lot in prophecy. That the new dawn is a common phrase for God beginning to do something great. Okay, just even imagine Easter morning. Okay, so we all have sunrise services. Why? Because God did an amazing work. All right, so the coming of dawn is a time when God does something new, something amazing. Ancient Near East literature describes the dawn as when the gods are working something new. They're starting something new. In fact, the Egyptians believe that there is a new creation every morning. The coming dawn means a new creation every morning. It means birth. It means life to the Egyptians. So something is going to happen that coming dawn. Back up a little to verse 14. You have sons-in-law. Now wait a minute. Weren't Lot's 2 daughters virgins that he offered them? And verse 8 talks about his daughters being virgins. And again, a surface or Aristotelian reading of this would say, wow, how inconsistent the Bible is, saying that his daughters are virgins and yet they have husbands. That doesn't make sense. Narrative logic, again, has no problem with it. Remember, that's rule number 4. This Eastern mindset would not have any problem with this. That's my list of rules number 4. If you don't remember my 4 rules for reading Scripture, you can download them again at the website. I encourage you to do that because you need to understand that this narrative logic, that's not inconsistent at all. Our Socratic Western mindset finds that inconsistent. Calling them virgins when they were to be given to the men of the city tells us what a sacrifice Lot was prepared to offer for the safety of the men. Having sons-in-laws who refused to go with them to safety tells us how bad they were, as well as the rest of the city. Plus, they might have added up to the 10 that God promised that would prevent his justice from raining down on them. Again, we see the epic layer of the Abraham narratives, and the actual facts just get in the way of the story. These don't worry about the facts. Let's concentrate on the narrative itself. Concentrate on what God is trying to say. What is the focus, the point of the narrative here? All right, so perfectly consistent to have virgin daughters and also have sons-in-law. Verse 22, Zor, a city which means small. It could be an etiological tale of why that city was still small today, meaning in Moses' time, or a morality tale that any city will remain small so that God's judgment would not be visited upon it. All right, so Zoar has a lot of significance behind it, and we've only scratched the surface of what that could be. Verse 18, "No, my Lord, please, your servant has found favor in your eyes." Every one of these is singular and not plural. This again lends to my thought, my theory, that it was one God and three aspects. "No, my Lord," singular, "please, you, your servant, has found favor in you eyes." It's hard in English to put it in singular, okay? But because your tends to be both plural and singular, so I'm trying to singularize something that you can't. But picture all these pronouns being singular, none of them plural. Now, why would he say that to two angels? Okay, these are all aspects of one God. All right, again, giving us the indication that this was different aspects of Yahweh, represented in the form of these two angelic beings. Lot addressed the Lord as singular, as single. All right, verse 26. Lot's wife looked back and she became a pillar of salt. The sin here is not just turning around, but looking, longing to go back. That word looked back, it just doesn't do it justice in the NIV. You have to understand that it wasn't just a quick glance, and that was her sin. What she did was desire to go back. That was her sin, that she missed the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, and she wanted basically sin as opposed to the freedom in God that God was offering. It's a common motif in the ancient Near East literature that when looking at the works of doom of a deity, that you turn into a pillar of salt. That's not original. That's not only found in the Bible. You find that in both Mesopotamian and Greek mythology, this turning into a pillar of salt because of longing or looking or seeing things of doom. In fact, that was the original of I can't think of her name. The woman that had snakes for hair, and in Greek mythology, and every time you looked at her, you became a pillar of salt. Yeah, Medusa. That's what it was. Thank you to our producer here who gave me the name Medusa. If you looked at her, you became a pillar of salt. That whole concept of looking at doom and becoming a pillar of salt was not just biblical. It was all over ancient Near East literature. Mesopotamian and Greek mythology talked about that. So Lot's wife looked at the doom. She lusted after what God told them to leave, and she became this pillar of salt. Verse 29, "So when God destroyed the cities of the plain, he remembered Abraham." Interesting. He remembered Abraham. This concluding statement shows the direct relationship to Moses and the children of Israel. They too were remembered by God and brought out of Egypt. They were remembered by God and brought out of Egypt. So here you have the application. You have again a city that is ripe for destruction. You have Egypt ripe for destruction. You have God calling his people out. Just like in the Exodus, he did it with Lot. But because there were not enough righteous in that city, in Egypt, he destroyed the place. Now, you have a choice, you children of Israel sitting out in the desert. You have a choice of turning around and looking at God's doom and facing the possibility of turning into a pillar of salt, or you can keep going forward. And that's what they heard. It's similar to the foil of the land that we talked about last time. Okay, and that we talked about at the beginning of this particular program. It is a foil. All right. We have one more Lot story, Lot narrative, and I'm just going to cover this one quickly because this is more of an ideological tale that is put into the narrative. And again, not for Abraham, but for you children of Israel sitting out in the desert. And that's 19 verse 22 to 38. And this is that whole strange story of Lot and his daughters that are left. Now these daughters did not have any children, and of course having children meant being blessed. The worst thing in the ancient Near East was to not have any children. That meant that you were not blessed and that you would have no future, because future was through your children. So Genesis 19 to 22, you have Lot and his 2 daughters who are left to settle into the mountains and into a cave. They decide to get their father drunk so that he will have sex with them, so they can preserve their father's line. One of the children became the Moabites, and the other became the Ammonites. Now, we know a lot about Moab and Ammon. In fact, Israel has to pass through Moab and Ammon on their way to the Promised Land. They are both become kingdoms or nations on the east side of the Jordan River, what is modern-day Jordan. Okay, where this is the kingdom of Ammon and the kingdom of Moab. So the Moabites, or the people of Moab, were Lot's descendants. Joshua passed by Moab in conquest in Judges 11. The tribe of Benjamin got too close to them, and it influenced Saul in 1 Samuel 22. Ruth is from Moab. Book of Ruth talks about that. Ezra and Nehemiah speak poorly of them in the reclaiming of the land. The Moabites became friendly with Egypt and provided border protection against the invading enemies during Rehoboam's time. They joined the alliance with Ahab against Judah, and later they absorbed the nation of Israel when they were conquered by Persia. The Ammonites, or the people from Ammon, again Lot's descendants. Joshua also told to pass by them in the conquest of Canaan in Deuteronomy 2. They worked against the Hebrews in Exodus. They joined with Eglon against Israel in the Judges. They were finally subdued by David in 2 Samuel 17, and they became vassals of Israel after their kingdom split up. Cruelty was denounced by Amos. They became a nation of cruelty, of cruel people. And that was in Amos talks about them. It seems that the ideological tale was for the purpose of telling the children of Israel why they were no longer brothers with the children of Lot. Moab and Ammon were allied with Egypt and would be a thorn in their flesh throughout their history. So that we get from this tale of what happened between Lot and his daughters, we understand who these 2 nations are and why, even though God told them to bypass them, that they were ripe for destruction and would soon be ripe for destruction. Moab was always a thorn in Israel's side, and Ammon was conquered eventually by Israel, but again, they ended up being a cruel people. So there you have the Lot narratives in the book of Genesis. The purpose of Lot in the Abraham cycle is, first, the separation pushes the narrative's conflict, since Lot would not be Abraham's promised descendant. Remember, again, this is an Abraham narrative, and this narrative is pushed forward with the introduction of this character called Lot. Okay, this nephew of Abraham called Lot pushes the narrative forward. We find out a lot about wrong choices that Israel in the desert could make. It illustrates the foil purpose in Lot's life and now in the children of Israel's life and in our lives. Abraham becomes more and more a faithful servant, but also becomes a successful warrior, which is what Israel needs to become, growing into his nation and father role and showing what Israel would soon be. Israel is being molded into a warrior nation in the desert. Abraham becomes more than a faithful servant, by showing his compassion in the test by God, compassion to save the whole for the sake of a few, a motif that we are so glad for, because through Abraham, for the sake of a few, we are all saved. Sodom and Gomorrah continues to illustrate the foil, but is also an echo of the flood story and the Exodus story, fleeing the plagues. An etiological tale about why other kingdoms are as bad as they are, and why God now has a chosen people whom he pulls from the destruction around them. That is why we have these Lot narratives in the Abraham cycle. All right, next week, or next time, we're going to be talking about the Akedah. The Akedah. Now, what is that? We usually call it the sacrifice of Isaac, but he was never really sacrificed, was he? The Jews call it the Akedah, meaning the binding of Isaac. We're going to talk about this unusual story, which is the last act in Abraham's life. It is lesson 7. We have 9 lessons in Abraham, so we have 2 more following. But this is really the end of Abraham's narrative. We have a few things to clean up about Isaac before we move on to Jacob. But and we'll talk about the difference between Isaac and then Abraham and Jacob. Why did Isaac not get his own narrative, basically? He's only thought of in terms of Abraham or in terms of Jacob. So we'll talk about that later. But next time, we will be talking about the Akedah. Why did God test Abraham in this way? We'll look at that next time. All right, I'm going to read what is my column. The column is called Kairos Thoughts. And again, if you go to Diggin' the Bible, that's Diggin, thebible.com, you will find a link to Kairos Thoughts. And I encourage you to just check out the weekly. You can even sign up to receive them weekly if you like. We are doing, again, this is number 5 of 6, so it'd be good for you to go back and check the first 4. I'll quickly summarize them here, but check the first 4 of why civilizations fail. And there's amazing similarities to today. There is a huge book called A Study of History in 12 volumes and written by Sir Arnold Toynbee in 1987. In the 5th volume, subtitled The Disintegrations of Civilizations, he gives us 6 different reasons why civilizations throughout history have collapsed. Edmund Burke said, "Those who do not know history are destined to repeat it." So let's take a look at the 6 reasons why civilizations fail. Reason number 1 is cultural suicide. We talked about that earlier. That is, most civilizations, big civilizations, crumble from the inside before they are defeated from the outside. And we can see that already in the United States, can't we? Reason number 2 is truancy or escapism, where people in the civilization choose entertainment over being productive citizens. Rome is really good at that. They entertain their people in the Colosseum instead of making them or giving them a chance to be productive citizens. We see that very easily today with all of our kids with their faces in computers and in their smartphones. Reason number 3, a sense of promiscuity. Now, this is not only literally promiscuous behavior, but it's also just a sense of voyeurism into people's lives, into how people live and what they do. And that's so prevalent today. Everybody has their YouTube 15 minutes of fame, and sometimes it lasts too long, and sometimes that is too short for these people. Reason number 4, a sense of drift. A sense of drift, and that is that all those mores that tied you down, all of those things that were important to you that grounded you are gone. When all of our senses that ground us are gone, we understand that our society is starting to crumble. And now today we're going to talk about reason number 5, abandon. Abandon can also be called lawlessness, but I like the word abandon better. How else can you describe the sudden abandonment of law and any kind of moral code? We see this in the hopelessness of terrorism. After all, that's what terrorism is. You live a life of hopeless abandon, where law and rules must be upended in order to make some kind of statement or believe in some kind of magical change in society. Bombing civilians and even using children as suicide bombers against their wishes and against any kind of moral law. We have abandoned laws. But abandon rears its ugly head in milder ways in our everyday lives, and our people hoodwink their way through life. Petty thefts from hotel rooms, small intentional inaccuracies in taxes, lying, cheating, stealing. Every civilization, Toynbee studied, has some such abandon before they self-destruct. Every civilization realizes too late that it is the little holes in the dike that precipitate the eventual collapse of the entire structure. Ancient Israel, as recorded in the Bible, shows this free fall. Daniel wrote this in Daniel 9, "We have sinned and done wrong. We have been wicked and have rebelled. We have turned away from your commands and your laws. We have not obeyed. We have turned away, refusing to obey you. Therefore disaster will come upon us." Over and over again, when Israel disregards the laws or abuses it, they fell again and again until they were no longer rescued by God. I must confess that I feel a sense of abandon and hopelessness within my own house. I have been fighting with the bank for 4 years about an issue of lost payments and bank inaccuracies, and after the bank went bankrupt and tried to foreclose on me, why pay them? Why work on my house when they could take it from me at any time? Why not just live in it until they kick me out? If you would have told me 10 years ago that I would not be making house payments because I didn't trust the bank, I would have laughed at you. Yet I abandon. Where are you? Do you feel that sense of abandon? I know the only answer to understand that in the world it is not in our control. The only answer is to understand that the world is not in our control, but it is in God's control, and we must trust His interests are our best interests, no matter how dark it seems now. All right, next time we'll cover why civilizations fail, number 6, and that will be the final one. You can already catch that on the website if you want to look on the Kairos Thoughts on our website, diggingthebible.com. You can see it there right away. All right, I only have a few minutes left, and one of the questions I was given was that was emailed to me, and I encourage that. Again, Steve at diggingthebible.com or diggingthebible@cox.net. Either way, you can send a question to me by email, and I'll try to get to it. I discussed a lot of them on the foil and the land as a foil. I had a number of questions on that. I had a couple other questions about, was Melchizedek Jesus? Was Melchizedek Jesus? Now we're talking about the passage in the New Testament where Jesus was a priest in the order of Melchizedek. I do not believe that Melchizedek was Jesus. Okay, now I believe he was a different figure compared to all the other kings. He was the king of righteousness and the king of Salem, or the king of peace. So a lot of insinuation, but I don't think he was Jesus any more than, say, Moses was Jesus. He was a type of Christ. There were a lot of types of Christ in the Old Testament, where many of the things that they do and say and relate to what Jesus did and said. And that's a fulfillment of prophecy with all of these types of Christ that you find in the Old Testament. You have the archetype, which means the perfect one, and then you have types, which means things that point to the perfect one. I believe Melchizedek was a type of Christ. He was not Jesus incarnate at the time. That's my belief. Now, there's many evidence pointing to that it could be Jesus incarnate, and I don't have a problem with that. with that belief. I just believe that he was a type, and that follows consistently with my belief that it had to mean something to Moses and the children of Israel at that time. Remember, Moses is telling this story to the children of Israel, and so it had to mean something to them at that time. And to say that it was Jesus would not have related to them at that time. He was making a statement about priests and about that 10%. So thank you for your question. That unfortunately is just about all we have time for here tonight. And I just really want to thank you for digging in the Bible with me. I'm Pastor Steve again. Send me your questions. Check out the website. It's been great being with you. And I thank you so much for joining me again. And again, check out Grace Valley Christian Reformed Church. We are located 1370 East Robindale Road, where you can get me more than just here on the radio. You can get the live version of Pastor Steve on Sundays, 9:15 Sunday School, 10:30 worship, and then Wednesdays we have a Bible study, 7 o'clock Wednesday nights. Join me. Thank you again for all you've given.
Thank you for digging the Bible with me, Pastor Steve Wonderink. Join me again next week at the same time at KKVV, or you can join me for Sunday worship every Sunday at 10:30 at 1370 East Robindale Road. That's Grace Valley Church, 1370 East Robindale Road. 10:30 Sundays, even Sunday school at 9:15. gracevalleychurch.org. Join me again next Sunday for Digging the Word, 6 to 7 o'clock every Sunday evening.
The Reed Sea down to Mount Sinai, and then wandering for the 40 years, and finally ending up at the border of the Promised Land. That'll be part 2 of the Exodus narrative that goes all the way through Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. We'll be catching the narratives inside of there. And then we'll be coming back to catch the laws in the building of the tabernacle. That's our Sunday school. But I also will be covering that in this show probably next year sometime as we move through Genesis and move on into Exodus then as well. So again, all of that is on the website. You can see the radio show, download older radio shows, and get the PDFs for this week's. Also, I have my column that you'll be able to follow called Kairos Thoughts. It's a weekly column that I read here on this radio show, but you'll catch all the previous ones there on the website as well. Which reminds me, you can email me questions. And I have a number of questions, again, that I need to go over. We talked about the first 2 Lot narratives last week, our last time together, and one of them was about Melchizedek. The other question was about the land, the choice of land that Lot made. And I described the land in this narrative as a foil of the Lot narratives. And if you go to the website, you'll be able to download a PDF so you can follow along in the study as we'll dig into the Bible together today. It's always good to have some kind of paperwork in front of you. I always include a lot of pictures and graphs and things like that to catch your eye and to explain things just a little bit better. Sometimes we learn from graphs and pictures just as well as we learn from words and hearing. So I encourage you to download that PDF. It currently still is free, but if you'd like to buy the whole series, that is on Amazon.com. Just look up my last name, Wonderink, and in the beginning, or just put Pastor Steve Genesis, and you'll see it show up on Amazon.com, and you can order the books there. Also, you can come and catch me at our church, Grace Valley Christian Reformed Church, located in 1370 East Robindale Road. 10:30 Sunday services. At 9:15, though, we are also going through the book of Exodus. And we are just starting part 2 of the book of Exodus, which is the wilderness. Part 1 was Exodus 1 through 15, where Israel finally leaves Exodus. And now we're moving into the wilderness after they cross the Reed Sea. We are moving on into the wilderness, and that whole journey, the narrative of their journey from... And I need to explain it a little better. I had a lot of emailed questions. What exactly is a foil? Foil spelled F-O-I-L. Now, that's like tin foil or aluminum foil. It's like a foil you can use with a sword, but this is different. This is more of a literary term or a drama term. Shakespeare has a lot of foils in his writing. And so the Bible also uses land as a foil. Now let me explain that, because that's going to be, I'm going to apply that again to today's narrative as we talk about the 3 more Lot narratives in the Abraham story and why they're there. A foil is something that determines your personality. It brings out what kind of a person you are. And the example I always use is picture this. You're walking down the street by yourself, nobody around, and you find a wallet with $1,000 cash in the wallet. What do? That wallet, or actually more likely the cash, is a foil. It brings out something in your personality. It tells whoever's watching, it tells you even, what your personality is like. If you pick up the wallet and bring it to the local police station, turn it in, or...
The views and opinions on the following program are those of the participants and not necessarily those of KKVV Las Vegas.
The program you are about to hear has been pre-recorded for airing at this time. Please hold all phone calls. Once again, this is a pre-recorded program.
I believe we have a crisis of depth in our knowledge of the Bible. We think we know what the Bible says, but do we? Do we really? We may know the story, but we miss the message, the point, or the focus of that narrative. Hi, this is Pastor Steve Wondering, and I invite you now to join me in digging in the Bible. Let's dig in the Bible together.
Hello again and welcome to Dig in the Bible. I'm Pastor Steve, and it's good to be with you again. Again, please visit the diginthebible.com website. You'll find a lot of helpful things there, but most of all, you'll find an outline or a study guide for what I'm talking about today. I'm going through the In the Beginning book, the Bible study that I wrote. We're in the beginning, part 2, discussing Abraham. And specifically, we're working on the Lot narratives. And so we are on part 2, lesson 6. So if you try to find the person whose license you just found that has an address on it, call that person and bring it to them, wallet intact with the $1,000 cash still there, what does that say about you? If you pull out the $1,000 and throw the wallet into the trash can, what does that say about you? The cash, the wallet, is a foil. Now that applies here in Genesis as we talk about Lot, because the land is a foil. The land, the promised land, the land that God promised Abraham he and his descendants would have, would occupy. But it just doesn't look like it right now. So when Lot looks at the land surrounding Sodom and Gomorrah, he chooses that. Abraham chooses God's promises. Even though it doesn't look like it, he's still a wandering nomad, a wandering shepherd. He really doesn't have any land to call his own. Lot looks down at Sodom and Gomorrah and finds something desirable, really good land, a good place to be, a place close to the cities, a place where he can sell his sheep, his herds, and do all this commerce. He decides to go to Sodom. Now, one of the things that I always ask you to do